The joining rhythm seems to have slowed down, so I'm gonna say that we're gonna go. Okay.
All right. Let's do it.
So, hello everybody. I'm really happy to welcome you all. I'm here with Nathan Parker and Emilio Villis, and it's an honor to be telling you about the Internet of Production Alliance, and more specifically about the Open KnowHow standard. The way the session is going to happen is there's going to be some more theoretical conversations, then a more hands-on part where I really hope you have your computers and browsers available. Probably do since you're watching us, but if you're on a phone, it might be a good idea to get a computer. And then we'll move back to some theoretical conversations in which the Q&A can happen at the same time as relevant, depending on how Nathan feels about that. So if we can move on to just an intro about what this looks like, a little bit of housekeeping. I have just put in the chat. You can go back to the previous slide, Emilio.
There it is.
Chat a Miro board so that you have it open for when we need it, so that we're all ready to go. I can see people are still joining. I don't know if I need to resend the link every time someone new enters, but I'll do it anyway. So we're going to use this Miro board, so please have it open so that we're not all fumbling around when we actually need to use it. And the other housekeeping is that in terms of questions, I guess you all know this by now, but you can ask your questions in the chat. We have also set a section at the end of the Miro board with like post-its of things you think we should speak about, or comments or question. If you leave them there, it's kind of better for posterity, because then people won't have the chat down the line. So if you leave it on the Miro board, it's easier to access those again later. So if we move on to the first point of our agenda, it is for me to welcome you all as coordinator of the Internet of Production Alliance. I will start by telling you a little bit about us. But maybe you can sense it from that first image as we were waiting, and from the image here in the background. But the idea of the Internet of Production Alliance is that we're a group of people trying to make an Internet of Production come to life. We believe most of you are already contributing to that. So we'll explain a bit more about what we do and invite you to join us, basically. If we move on to the next slide. So the Internet of Production Alliance, we have a sort of grand ambition, which is to enable anyone, anywhere. And by that, we really mean anywhere. We have a lot of very various fields of action among our memberships. So enable anyone, anywhere to participate in production or manufacturing or fabrication, or whichever is the word that resonates the most with you. And how we do that is that we are building what will enable someone to actually get that done. So I'll make this a bit more concrete. Some of the organizations in our alliance work in humanitarian environments or disaster relief. Today, when they are a lot of the humanitarian response functions by receiving large shipments of buckets or soap or protective devices, as one has seen in the COVID response, masks and gloves, etc., shipped from a manufacturing location, often in China, but not only, then to a regional logistical platform, let's say Dubai or Nairobi, then shipped to Copenhagen, actually where I live, and then shipped back out to humanitarian regional hubs, and then back into a refugee camp eventually. Some organizations, including Field Ready, some people of Field Ready are here, but also others are looking at, well, there is an existing manufacturing system in almost all locations. There are sewing machines and there are fab labs in humanitarian locations that were actually created by the humanitarian actors that would be capable of building these. But today, if we want these materials to be built there, we need to find a design that can be used. And so looking at how to create something there means thinking, okay, I need my water purification device. I will open my browser. I will either create one because I'm a very brilliant engineer, and then I, like 100 or probably more people will create this device yet again, or I will look online and I will go to the 70+ platforms and look at all the different designs and try to figure out which one is the right one. I'll probably call a couple of friends, maybe in Geneva, maybe in a Nepalese Fab Lab, and ask for advice. I know the Copenhagen Fab Labs were really good at sharing maps, blueprints. Then I'll pick one of the designs, then I'll have to figure out like where could I get it built and who has the skills for that. And then I'll try to figure out how I can pay these people. So let alone the matter of where do I get all the material and what kind of level of materials do I need for these. So that's like the picture of what it looks like right now to use the internet for production to do global decentralized manufacturing. All of those bricks are really, really brilliant. But what we believe is that in the same way that common standards and protocols enabled information flow to be a lot more logical and global with the internet, we would like to have a similar level of infrastructure underpinning an internet of production, standards enabling us to be able to search for designs globally, like we are able to search for information in a Google or DuckDuckGo search engine. We want to be able to have on maps, whether they're OpenStreetMap or Google Maps, the locations of where you can manufacture things. We want to have global information about the different kinds of skills it takes to build different materials. And the common element of all of this is building the sets of standards about how you build something, where you build something, what you need to build it, so that you can actually live in an internet of production in the same way that we live in an internet of information. Now, who is part of the Alliance? A lot of makers, researchers, humanitarian organizations, people who have created platforms on which some of these designs. We've got people from Wikifactory, from Appropedia, and most of you would be very welcome to join. And we are sincerely hoping that some of the work that you'll do today are things that you'll want to take back where you are. Today, we're going to be focusing on the documentation of designs, that these are things that you will then apply within your own organizations so that we can grow the amount of, grow the reach of the standards that we're developing, basically. Moving on to the next slide. We will be working today more specifically on one of the standards that we've created. We'll talk later about the other ones, which is Open KnowHow. And going back to my example before about the 70+ platforms in which you can search for a design, the Open KnowHow standard was created by a community of, I'd say, enthusiastic open hardware users, manufacturers, creators who came together to create the standard. They focused initially on being able to discover, we call the discoverability of the standard, the focus being able to be for documentation of how to create designs to be findable in search engines, whether it's posted on any of those platforms or on the website of an organization. So let's say I'm the Red Cross maybe one day, but for now an organization like Field Ready, I publish my design, I want it to be discoverable. And this is the standard that we're going to be working on with today. And I will hand over to Emilio to dig a bit deeper into that.
Yeah, so the goals of the Open KnowHow standard were, I divided them into 4. The first one is that important information about manufacturing is shared. And the rationale behind this is that sometimes there's lots of documentation online, but it's not good documentation. What we believe is good documentation can vary, so that's always a challenge. And the most important part of this, of having a standard, is having a common language and having a common set of criteria of what is decent or good documentation in order to reproduce a design, especially when we're sharing it online and it is expected to be used in the future. So that can ensure that humans first can understand documentation more easily. We can know where things are by looking at a manifest, but also that this standard is computer readable so that it can be crawled by any platform that wishes to have, for example, a compendium of devices for a specific subject. For example, we're looking to find face shields online, then using specific keywords, specific fields that can be readable on a file, a simple file called a manifest. And then that can be used to either put together a list of devices, to study them, or simply to share them more easily instead of having all of the documentation moved from one platform to another. So that can allow users to find all over the internet what they want to share, or for specific manufacturers or designers to share designs with other people so that things can be built. And there are three specific aspects of the standard that are being sought after. The first one is discoverability. That it can be discovered by anyone, that it is portable, so that it can move from one platform to another using a common language, and finally interactivity, that applications can be built from it. So I'm using examples from Appropedia because that is the platform that I work with. But imagine that many other platforms that are starting to use Open KnowHow, how they can use Open KnowHow. So first one is that you can go to search.openknowhow.org right now, and we have a search platform where you can find all these aggregated manifest files, and with them you can start searching for specifically what you want. So that is one thing, and you can have different platforms that are used differently, and documentation that's made differently by different people for different uses. For example, for open science, or for manufacturing purposes, or for education, etc. But if they're using the same standard, they can be switched from one platform to another. So imagine the Red Cross or Field Ready finding uses for materials that are used for education initially, and being repurposed and being found easily from different platforms that are not common to makers of one type, but that can be aggregated. So that's one. Then portability, which is that you can just have a design and manufacturing files and other types of materials in one platform, but you can export it to others. And this is started to be used by other platforms, which are building crawlers to find all over the internet devices, and they're difficult to aggregate if you don't have a common language. So with this, you can find specifically a list of items that can be used to put in another place. So that also ensures that devices and their documentation are not bound by only one platform, but that they rather can live anywhere on the internet, and that can enable for these designs to live for longer. So that's another thing. And then finally, the creation of interactive platforms or applications that we expect people to start developing by using Open KnowHow. For example, last year we did a very similar workshop. The activity is very similar, but the goal was to enable us to think about how we can compare different designs during the COVID-19 pandemic. How can we think about documentation of things that are very similar, but that may have differences in quality, in easiness of use, easiness of manufacturing, etc. So those types of comparisons can be made by aggregating open know-how manifests and then thinking about them as data to be analyzed. So last year we had a very nice workshop. We have a couple people that were there last year, namely, I think Andrew and Cindy. So it's nice to have you with us. And of course, Andrew is one of the minds behind these standards. So I'm sure that he will want to drop in a couple, messages after this workshop. But yeah, we thought about the keywords and how people could use open know-how to aggregate different designs and then evaluate medical projects. And for this workshop, we want to...
Aren't you going to show the animation video?
Oh, yes. Yes, hold on. So this is...
Very
can you see it?
language.
Yeah, it's true. I opened it and then I forgot to show it. Yeah, so this was a very simple result of the previous workshop. We just put together keywords that people use to define designs. So we have some manifests that were created by the participants of the workshop and think about what are the common words that people use. And of course, it was COVID-19 and mask and mascarilla, which is mask in Spanish, But we wanted to draw attention to what will happen when we have thousands of manifests put together using the same keywords, a common language, and then we can start thinking about how to evaluate projects. Let's see, did it close down? Yes, I'll open it again. And for this workshop, we would like to direct you to the Miro board. Let us know if you need access. But the idea is to think about a project that is from your Fab Lab or personal that you would like to turn into an open know-how manifest. But if you don't, we have a series of projects that we just put together as an example for you to choose from. And if you wish, I will share the page of the standard so that you can look at it as well. It is very long. Making a manifest takes a while, but you can at least work on the mandatory fields of the manifest, which you can fill in 10 minutes. So we will create a manifest, then save it with that descriptive file name of the device that you're documenting, and then we will finish them and add it to the GitHub repository, which is part of the open know-how search page that I can show you right now. Let me see. But for now, please add your name with a sticky note over here. And we will use that in a bit. But I wanted to show you this, which has been made by the community. Here you can see that we have aggregated many different devices from different platforms. And you can search by using keywords for now. For example, I'm using cook, and then you find different devices that use that keyword. And this is the first approximation of what we expect for people to do by using open know-how. Yeah, I don't know if you have any questions before we get into the meaty part of the workshop, which is making the manifest. Something quick. No? All right. If you have any questions, please let us know. And yeah, so after you're done with leaving a note with your name, then we can move to this part of the workshop. We have prepared some pages of documentation here. And what you can do is just take the page here. Let me see if this.
You can either select one of the pages and copy it, but you can also, if you have on any platform a design of your own, then just copy the link of that design and put it above your name. And I learned today that if you are lucky with the platform you were on, you get a pretty image with it as well, and not just the link. Doesn't seem to work with Thingiverse though.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically just take and then just put it on top of your name. I put an example here, but and then after you've done that, so if you want to share your own documentation, you can simply paste the link on here and it will create one of these little boxes. And then this is the URL for you to create your manifest. So I'll show you how it works. As you fill in here, it will create your manifest file. So here, for example, you add this and then it fills in here. And then it helps you also to validate it as you work on it. So here's, the most important ones are the name of the hardware, description, and then this is intended use.
1 second,
Yes.
Emilio. I can see that a lot of people are still working on like selecting the design. Do you need us to hold off for a sec? I don't know. Say all good in the chat if you're ready to go, or say please wait.
Yeah, let's wait a minute. Yes, I see that someone raised their hands. You want to ask a question, or is it for us to wait?
I just can't find the URL of the form that you're using.
Oh yes, it's on step number 3, the IOP common DB. So if you click on that, it will open up. You'll see that there's a button to open it up. Yeah, but if not, I will send it to you here.
No, that's okay. Looks like it. Okay. Thanks.
No worries. All right. I think it's, we have pretty much a good number. All right. So now when you go to the form, you can start filling it in. So the idea is that you will read through the documentation of the page and try to find what is there and what is not there. And I have found that by doing this process, you can realize how much of the documentation is accessible, and you can start thinking about good practices also about how to document. So I'll go through the some of the mandatory fields so you can have an idea of what is in there. Nathan, if I say something that's not right, let me know. You can feel free to correct me. So first, the name of the hardware. Yeah. Then a description. Usually the description is what goes on top of the documentation page. It says this is a device for use in ABC, in the setting, etc. And then intended use, it's not mandatory, but just to explain it, this is more about what is the expected use. In some cases, some devices, for example, are used for education, but they can be repurposed for other uses. So, so that is the difference between the description and then the intended use. Then you can add keywords if you want. A link to the project. The link to the project is usually the main URL where the documentation resides, or the project. Then you can drop a link to the image of if there's a URL, and that is useful so that we can create on the open KnowHow search page. We can display it by linking it. Then this, if someone has made this hardware, it means that in some cases there's documentation that is designed, but it has not been created. So there's no physical proof that it can be created. And that someone has made this independently means that if the documentation has been followed by someone else who is not the creator in a different setting, and they have been able to reproduce this hardware. Then the licenses, which are required, and we have a list of different licenses that you can add here for the three main parts of the hardware documentation, which is the hardware, the documentation per se, and then the software, if it has any software, and then who grants the license. You can add, if you want, a version, which is not necessary, when it was created, and the author of the manifest, which is you. So you're creating the manifest, and that means that you're the author of the manifest. Your name, affiliation, and email. The language of the manifest, which is different from the language of the documentation. And this part here, this section, is in case that this manifest is a translation of another manifest. So if someone is making documentation using OpenKnowHow in one language, it can be translated into different languages to make it accessible, or it can be made by a computer, etc. So yeah, let's see. I think those are the most important ones. If you wish, we can give you 4 minutes, 5 minutes to finish documenting. But if you have any questions, please send any messages or any comments.
While we're enabling you all to look a little bit more into the manifest, I just wanted to mention a couple of things about OpenKnowHow. So OpenKnowHow was created in released in 2019, and in a couple of weeks we're going to be onboarding an OpenKnowHow specialist for the next 2 years, who will be working on maintaining, updating the standards, and supporting the community who both use and continue the work on OpenKnowHow. So if this is of particular interest to you beyond maybe just like the use of it for specific designs, if you have thoughts on what goes into the standard, how it should be promoted for wider adoption, etc., please do reach out to us at info@internetofproduction.org, because the working groups for Open KnowHow will be getting more active in the coming months and the next 2 years.
So how is everyone doing right now here? Any questions? Yes, we have some time after this for more meaty discussion. And we'll be done, yeah, in a few minutes with.
Unless there's a specific, like, I need 2 minutes more. I think we can move on from there to the rest of your examples. And then we will be hearing from Nathan to put this in a wider perspective of an Internet of Production.
Yes. Yeah, so when you're done, you can simply click on the section to the right of the form, or click on copy. And if you go back to the Miro board, you can paste your manifest down here. So we have done this example here. So we have done it for the sake of time, just to put it here, and because the other option was to add it to the GitHub repository, but we will do that, and you will have contributed a project to the Open KnowHow search page. Awesome, here's one. Yeah, does anyone have any question about the fields of this tool to make the manifest? So would you like for us to give you a couple minutes, or do you think that we should continue? What do you think, Barbara? Should we just move on while the rest are?
Well, I'm not personally creating a manifest, so maybe I'm not the best person to ask. Jerome, thanks with your continue. Thank you.
All right.
Well, then let's move on back to the presentation.
Yes.
So as I was mentioning at the beginning, Open KnowHow is just the first of the standards that was released by the Internet of Production Alliance. Those standards are part of an open knowledge framework that would enable an Internet of Production to actually be at a global scale and used by anyone, anywhere. And we're really happy that we have Nathan with us to tell you a little bit more about this wider view of what the use of these standards means for making.
Thanks, Barbara. Hi, everybody. So, for me, this is a very abstract topic in a lot of ways, but the impacts are very tangible. I think when looked at from the right perspective. We've all seen over the last year and a half the the damage that can come from a supply chain that fails you when you need it. In many ways, the sort of knock-on effects of supply chain failure can be as bad or worse than the crisis that caused the supply chain failure in the first place. And sort of by that same token, so the resilience of the supply chain that feeds the place where you live is a huge piece of the life support for everyone who lives there, and it is a measure of the resilience of that place. And I think it's worth really understanding that the supply chains failures that we've seen are not intentional, but they are by design. In that supply chains, like any large complicated system, can be optimized for any number of variables, but not all of them at once. You have to pick something. And in general, you can optimize for efficiency or resilience, but never both. And as the just-in-time logistics model has really dominated global shipping and logistics and supply chains for the last decade plus, everyone who operates a supply chain of some sort is incentivized to push further and further towards maximum efficiency. And this moves us away from any kind of resilient system. So if we want to have systems of resilience that will protect us and our communities, we have to create them ourselves. But what this means is that things that, like what we've seen over the last year, where makers come together and say, well, I'm going to design something to meet this need because no one can order it online and right now, that's not a supply chain. And anyone who is directly involved in those efforts over the last couple of years is aware that it's a lot more complicated than if you build it, they will come. There's a lot more steps between recognizing a gap, having the ability to make one in your garage, and actually getting it at scale to the people who need it, and having the feedback loops built in that let you know if something in your design was wrong and didn't work for half the people who got it. And how do you update that? And how do you know that the version of the design that's going out on the next round is the updated one and not the old one? Things like this are not insolvable problems. They've all been very well solved inside closed private supply chain systems. What doesn't exist is an open system that people can engage with from where they're at. If they are designers, how do they can contribute designs into a system? If they are manufacturers, how can they get the designs that have been generated by someone else, get the demand, meet that demand, feed it into a logistics pipeline? The goal is that no one should have to reinvent the entire wheel. And what I saw over pretty much all of last year was people doing exactly that. Citizen maker efforts accounted for something like over 48 million units of PPE and other medical supplies being created over the last year. And yet for every one of those things, an enormous amount of time and energy was spent reinventing the wheel as far as how do you actually get that to people? How do you actually manage it once it goes out your door? Let's see, I have some images. Can I share here? I think, Emilio, you need to let me share or stop sharing.
I think you're host, so you should be able to just
take
over.
No, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
You want to share the image?
Yeah, actually, I think it looks like I need to be remade co-host. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. There's only one host at a time.
Hold on, in a second.
Stand by, everybody. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Let's see. Briefly, this is the slide I was working on for something else about efficiency versus resilience as a good visual of the systems that are very profitable are over here, but they're not really very well built for a world that is facing sort of perpetual crisis, as anyone who's paying attention to the IPCC report coming out today. So let's look at this in another sense. Okay, so beyond just having an open know-how, we need a similarly open system for moving it all the way through the sort of 5 phases of this, this idea of an open supply chain. So we have design, documentation review, demand aggregation, distributed manufacturing, and delivery logistics, very broadly. This was an early version of a map, but it was the one I could find on short notice, that sort of follows a design as it moves through this process that gets matched via demand aggregators, sent into distributed manufacturing systems where that design is converted into an object. That object passes into a delivery and logistics platform that actually brings it back to the people whose demand was aggregated in the first place. And you need feedback loops from there back to design so that that design can be updated, so it can be amended, so it can be tracked and so on. So all of this comes back to this notion of an open knowledge framework as kind of the parent idea above things like open know-how. Because to recreate a supply chain, you need to be able to describe the object, but you also need to be able to match it to a place that can make it. So this is where open know-how and open know-where kind of become like, marker cells on the surface of or marker proteins on the surface of a cell that say, these things that are shaped this way can fit here. That sort of automate the process of saying, well, okay, you've got these designs, but they need to be made in a place. How do we match those two things together? But then you need a process. You need to be able to say, okay, well, we need 10,000 of these things made. To do that is more than just, giving one person 10,000 hours to make 10,000 of them. You need something that scales. And that process is in itself something that has to be represented in a way that can be easily shared, that can be open and so on. You need to be able to represent the entire agreement about who gets how much of what, for what, where, and when as a contract. And again, contracting is something that's a well-solved problem, but it tends to be opaque by design because that gives the people who manage that opacity more money. This just needs to be a very simple open framework that allows these kinds of interactions and transactions to be tied to some kind of contract. You need a logistics and some transport protocol for ensuring that the thing gets to where it's going, and also to indicate that if there's anything special about how it needs to get there, that information is attached. If something needs to be part of a cold chain, for example, and cannot get above 10 degrees Celsius over its entire journey, that needs to be very clearly marked as part of how this object moves through the system. So transport, contracting, process, open nowhere for facilities management, and open know-how for design. All of these come together and make possible a truly open and sort of ad hoc supply chain that people can actually engage with, sort of starting from where they're at, without this enormous duplication of effort that plagued basically every effort to respond effectively to supply chain failures thus far. That's kind of the big picture rant. Emilio, Barbara, is there anything else that you wanted me to cover while I was on this?
I wanted to link that to the fact that we're going to be working at least over the next 2 years, or we're going to be starting over the next 2 years, the process on some of these standards. Maybe repeating that these standards are those communication protocols that we need to see an Internet of Production at scales. And so currently the Internet of Production Alliance focuses on getting these these under wires or communication elements between those information up and running. And the next 3 standards out of those that you have described that will be released, I'll describe them in a second, but they will be created with the same methodology as the first 2 ones, open know-how and open know-where, which enables you to know where manufacturing capacity is. And those were created with a scoping exercise identifying what's already out there, because we all know that creating standards has the risk of just creating yet another new standard. So a lot of the work in open know-how and open know-where was not about creating something new, but more scoping what was already out there. and getting all of those standards creators or users in the room to decide what was going to go in there. And this means that we're going to be engaging with a lot of people that are the you or that you know. And so this first scoping exercise is then followed by work on developing the actual designing and developing the standards. And the next 3 ones that we're going to be working on are, from what you mentioned, the questions of the skills and who is capable of manufacturing what we're talking about. The materials, where do we get what we actually need to get the item design built, materials, components. And the third one is that currently a complex question of business models and contracts. Each of these is not necessarily one standard. Some of these answers to some of these might not actually be standards, or might be a whole family of standards. But those 3 elements, we're going to be working on them. And one of the first things we'll be needing is the involvement and the collaboration with users of standards, or users of elements of these 3 categories of standards that will be created, so that we make sure that we are not reinventing the wheel of standards and of communication protocols. So I just wanted to make the link with that. And maybe, Nathan, you could expand on some of the work that you've been working on with Helpful Engineering around that, if that's relevant to you.
Yeah, sorry, I was just replying to Jerome with that architecture diagram in case anyone was interested. So I missed the last bit of what you were saying. Can you repeat what
I
you were
was just saying that you might want to mention that this is part of the work you've been doing with Helpful Engineering.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I've been working for the last, I was one of the people who organized the event in Warsaw where OKH sort of first came together, along with Emilio and Andrew and some other folks who might be here. And much of the last year I've spent with helpfulengineering.org, kind of, watching the frantic response to COVID and supply chain failures, and being like, guys, this is going to happen again. We should have better than a Band-Aid put together. We need something that's actually like a durable system. To that end, we've been in conversations with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which would be sort of the logical home for a standard like this, at least in the US. And to get things in sort of their language, we've been putting this together in the form of a white paper. And that white paper is on what we're calling the supply chain interoperability specification, and kind of ties together all of this open knowledge framework in a way that is focused on actually creating this supply chain. So it's trying to bring it out of the abstract and into what will actually help us make the system work. We talk about these standards as sort of being the underlying substrate in the same way that the internet is built on HTTP. So it doesn't matter what HTTP doesn't care about the content of your website, as long as it is, within the format that's expected. You can do anything you want with it and send requests and so on. So these standards are meant to be kind of at that level. Pardon. On top of that, you build an engine that is designed to interact with these standards programmatically. This is what lets you do a lot of the things that Barbara and Emilio were talking about earlier, where instead of, like, if anyone who's spent any time on Thingiverse or similar sites knows that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of near identical replicas of the exact same thing you have to sift through, and very little way to programmatically manage that. Things like open KnowHow metadata allow you to say very easily do things like, okay, any designs that are 95% plus similar, going through all of their different metadata, just cluster them together, roll them up into one thing. If I want to look at that kind of thing, I'll look at it. I don't need 18 out of 20 items on this one page to be the same thing. Or if you want to find only the latest version, or you want to find only the one that's actually been produced the most times. These are the kinds of things that need an engine to built on top of these standards to do, that can manage this via API calls. And then sort of the final layer on top of that is the platform that actually allows interaction with this. So this is sort of our long-term goal. But if anyone is interested in looking at, participating in, reviewing the white paper, please get in touch with me. My contact information is on the sticky on the board. And be more than happy to have more people sort of working on it. We're getting into like final review of the current version of this paper, but there's still plenty of work to go. Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to open Q&A because that's usually the most interesting part. I just want to mention before that, in case anybody needs to leave before the end, that we are doing another workshop during Fab City on Saturday at 1 p.m. Paris, Europe time, Central Europe time was that hand movement I did. I don't know. And it will be focused on the other standard that we've already released, which is Open Nowhere. So it will be looking more at like, what does it mean to be able to map where manufacturing can happen, with some examples of people who are actually using these in different contexts or want to use it. So like write that in your calendar if that's something that you want to and can attend. And beyond that, the floor is yours. I hope you have questions.
I'll start. Is there some kind of database on which I can upload the form, the YAML file? Let's say we use Wikifactory or GitHub. Is there a way to centralize at least the list of the projects?
Yes. Right now you can upload it to the Open KnowHow GitHub. We have I'll send you the link where you can send it, and there it goes to the Open KnowHow search while we're working on different. But the good thing about Open KnowHow is that it decentralizes the need for a database, right? So you can have manifests living in different parts of the internet, as Nathan was mentioning. So yeah, you can either send it to him or you can put it on the GitHub, or it all works. But I'll send it.
Okay, just another one, which is a bit far from my first question. Have you thought about some kind of, there is the ISBN, the International Standard Book Numbers for books. So each books on the world have only one number. Maybe we can have the same for a part. I know that the amount of worldwide parts will be huge, but it might be interesting to just, let's say I have a bill of materials, I use that type of screw precisely. The screw could have the precise part number that will help finding out, sourcing it afterward.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the bill of materials sort of chunk of an OKH is a very deep piece that can unpack into quite a lot. But the goal is for it to be compatible with existing systems rather than try to create a new one. So, if you have the McMaster car catalog of, hardware and fasteners and electronic components and so on, you should be able to say in your bill of materials for an OKH, like catalog reference, McMaster car, item number, and that's traceable back into sort of a canonical system. Not everything will have that, and that's going to take some work to normalize across every possible system that we could be calling for. Because normalizing SparkFun, McMaster car, Alibaba, etc. is going to be an undertaking, but the goal is for it to be ultimately compatible across all of those things.
Can I just try to extend the conversation a bit? Yeah, first of all, congratulations. It's quite an inspiration to see the project. I am researching waste prevention through practices of reuse, be them repair, upcycling, or recirculation. And I guess my usual critical take on the Fab Lab or the Fab culture is how much its vocabulary tends to talk a lot about manufacturing and not that much about maintenance and repair. And I see that in the form you add, there is a part about maintenance, operating instructions, maintenance instructions, and disposal instructions. But I guess that connects a lot with what Jerome just asked. Also, you know, not only sharing the bill of materials, but and how do you ensure? And sure, I'm not sure it was Jerome, but the idea of centralizing this information, in a sense, it would be interesting in order to survive the people who maintain the informations or the people who manufacture it, and to ensure that this information is available even if those persons are not, or those organizations are not yet, are not interested anymore in maintaining these informations. And I think there could be some connections with the regulations that are being implemented right now on the right to repair, and perhaps being a little more, you know, address a little more directly the issues related to maintenance and to repair would be interesting, not only to talk about manufacturing, but also to think about how a focus on use and reuse could help gain even support from other areas, not necessarily only the industry, but also, you know, environment agencies. And we are, I guess, we're in a moment that things are starting to change, I hope. that would be a kind of interesting discussion to have. And I'll try to attend also the workshop on Saturday, because Open Nowhere is also related to what I'm trying to do in smart cities, related to reuse and infrastructure for people to repair their own stuff. So I guess, yeah, I just thought that, you know, it was interesting to see your presentation, and I hope we can find ways to, yeah, exchange.
Thank you. That's great. I have one thing I can say to that, and then anyone else is welcome to jump in. But yeah, no, I really like what you're doing, and I think the reuse and repair angle is really important. One of the things that I think that this open knowledge framework enables is this sort of convergence of information around design in a way that hasn't been possible before. So when we touched on this a little bit earlier when we said, you know, okay, so you have an OKH for a given object. And as we start building these systems around it, this allows us to do things like, you know, track sort of versions, so we don't have divergence of design, but rather convergence. You know, if everyone's working on some version of this thing, we can tie those together, which means we can also start tying together other pieces of information around the same thing, like how do you repair it? What can you do with it when it's reached end of life? How do you dispose of it? How do you turn this into the feedstock for another thing? And as that information aggregates, as long as it is, you know, reasonably well maintained, which is itself a non-trivial problem, but as long as it's well maintained, that information can continue to accrue and build as the user base continues to use and build, rather than just being lost with that one particular file on Thingiverse somewhere. You know, it allows this aggregation of meaning and so on. So I think there is a lot of potential for that. It would just be a matter of, you know, as you go through the field, you can see, you know, here's where you link out to bill of materials, here's where you link out to these things, including a whole sort of section that can be plugged into that on reuse and maintenance and so on. Wouldn't be a very big addition. It would just be a matter of making the systems that sort of take that additional information and make it useful to people who are trying to do it.
I wanted to add another angle on that topic. It reminds me of the sort of the creation story of one of the members of the Alliance, and probably others, but one that I've interacted with more. They're called Kijenzi, and the starting point of Kijenzi is identifying that microscopes out in more rural areas in Kenya were not in use because they had knobs that were broken. And when we're talking about ensuring that designs are available and discoverable thanks to having an open know-how manifest and the searchability for it, it's not necessarily of the entire microscope, it's also of the knob for the repair. And so part of that, it links, Nathan, what you were saying about like the ecosystem around it. Even within the designs itself, you create this ecosystem of the objects, but also the parts of the objects. Materials are one thing, but even each component, subcomponent needs materials, but is already a whole other approach to objects and manufacturing. My understanding is that a lot of the making, there's hobby making of cool new things, but there's a lot of hobby making that is linked to designs of repair and recycling. It's not a either or, but it broadens a whole new attitude to where do I find the thing that I need and who can make it.
Yeah, and I would add that something I'm going to steal from Nathan because he's so eloquent, but he was mentioning something about building some sort of Wikipedia, right? So this semantic-based structure that can serve for people to say, sometimes people search for things not in a technical way. So I want the thing to do this, right? Or I want to do this without having this. And having all this structured data, but with semantic capabilities, it allows us to create tools for people to search in more specific ways. So I think that is one of the values, and I see that on Apropedia, that we're building the semantic media wiki structure around open know-how, where people can search for, I want to find a device that's cheaper than this threshold for this goal, and that has been built in this part of the world. And we are able to do this now thanks to this standard. But the idea is that not only in a platform, but rather that you have an internet of production where you can find all sorts of things in different platforms, and things can move from one platform to another and give users the freedom to move things around, or like manufacturing clusters to keep just sharing designs.
Felipe, who if we think outside of the maker, you were saying there's a lot of the making vocabulary that's about like creating things. If we think non-makers, do you have thoughts about who would be interesting stakeholders to reach out to about that, about like thinking about how something like a structured data standard about manufacturing locations and manufacturing documentation and designs, how they might be able to take that and roll with it in ways we might not imagine?
I see there's a potential interest of everybody who is involved with the so-called circular economy, but I'm also a little critical of that because the way, even though the argument makes sense, the practices are really, a tiny part of what they say they are doing. But related to that, I would say that there is, I see a lot of possibilities in connecting with the other contexts related to zero waste. I don't know in where you are located, but at least in Europe, I'm based in Berlin right now, and
I'm in Copenhagen.
Okay, so zero waste, I guess, at least in continental Europe, it's getting traction, and there will be a lot more interest in that. And it may be argued that decentralizing and distributing the manufacturing capacity is also related to avoiding waste and to reducing environmental impact, even though that may be contended. So I think there is some connection to be done with circular economy and zero waste, but that's, I guess, from my own bias in mobilizing those vocabularies in my PhD research for now. But I'm actually actively trying to find ways to think of reuse and to promote reuse of materials in cities. And I guess we do have in common, in my case, I was only conceptualizing. I haven't developed anything so far, but I was thinking of a kind of universal registry of things. I just posted this link here. And this perspective of reuse city and infrastructures for transformation of matter instead of only making or repair. I think the operations and the machinery and even the material basis of repair, of digital making, of traditional crafts may be similar, but the fact that we use these very different vocabularies and backgrounds sometimes creates barriers. And at some point, I figured it would be interesting to think of, transformation of matter that would involve repair, reuse, upcycling, and manufacturing on the same category. But yeah, that's only, I don't know, speculative exercises for my research. Nothing that concrete as you have.
Speaking of research, there's a question from Richard Civili. Do you want to ask it out loud? Or should I read it out?
I'm just looking for the unmute button here. Yeah, well, I have had an on again, off again interest in the field of recommender systems for maker education, and have sort of followed sort of the peaks and valleys of the research community itself. And recommender systems are, obviously how, Google and Facebook get us, to where they think that we want to be when we look for stuff. But this idea of a semantic algorithm, if you will, that basically starts off with kind of a plain English kind of do it yourself. Gee, I would like to make yada yada, but the person doesn't really have the terminology to get to the materials and the instructions that maybe they need. From what I understand, it's almost a classic function for a well-tuned recommender system. I don't know if there is such a recommender algorithm out there that's been designed specifically for this kind of use case. And so I was just kind of throwing that out because I have seen, let's see, where the National Science Foundation would occasionally, fund a kind of a cluster of recommender research projects. And they say, okay, well, the science is done, Facebook has figured out what they need. And, and so it becomes, less interesting in the research community because the work has already been done. But a few years later, you start hearing interest in wellness, for example, is now a big deal in a lot of corporations. And so there's been sort of an uptick in research funding on wellness recommender algorithms. So these kinds of use cases kind of come and go as time goes on. And so my question is there any resurgence or prospect for funder interest in supporting sort of a new generation of recommender systems tuned to the needs of the maker and the Fab Lab community, or to the broader issue of microfabrication and supply chain resilience overall that you guys are talking about. I don't know if this makes any sense, but that's what I was trying to say.
It definitely makes sense. I think it's an excellent question. I'm in that specific area. I don't know of anyone who's doing research that's compatible with this particular type of data set, in large part because the data set isn't really mature enough for.
I'm upside down. Sorry. Sorry.
We're really still trying to build a data set that's robust enough and mature enough to really do that kind of machine learning on it. But I know there was a number of universities that were, present and involved in the sort of inception of this project. So I'm sure there's programs that could be found. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, nothing currently in existence.
Yeah, I know of Julieta Arancio. She did for her PhD some research on open hardware ontologies. So
Nice.
I think that could be like a very specific application. She did it for science oriented hardware design. So she worked with the GOSH community. I do not know if she has published anything regarding her open hardware designs. And also, I have a paper coming up for for the Cumulus Roma conference from last year, which was about community-based collaborative hardware ontologies as well. So, but in the end, that is one of the reasons why I ended up being so interested in open KnowHow, because in the end, open KnowHow was the solution. So yeah, although open KnowHow is like, it is the solution, it's not, it's being used more as technical standard, but it stands on its own as an ontology. So maybe that can answer a little bit that question.
What about the European, so it's not academic research, well, it partly is, but what about the European funding behind the distributed design platform? Because if we're looking at Fab City environments in which everybody's able to make and remake and look for exactly with like I can't remember what was the word that was used, but a non-knower vocabulary, that might be an angle. I think Juliet is part of it as well. Can somebody remember the name of the European program that's behind that, or I can look it up?
The Open Next. Yes, I shared on the chat a link to part of they have Oshi and Loshi, I think. So that's another ontology, and they're also looking for semantic capabilities, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the thing I was talking about earlier, where there's like the sort of the standards and then the engine and then the platform, like that would sit at the engine level. And right now that's a cart ahead of the horse a little bit, but I think it's the kind of thing that could be developed in parallel with the standards as they currently exist, because there's enough to them that you would at least have something kind of to build a beta version of this engine on.
Hi everyone. Can I? This is Andrew Lamb speaking.
Andrew.
I really liked Richard's question as well, and in fact, all three questions in this discussion. I think one of the big challenges that we face at the Internet of Production Alliance is knowing where to draw the line between what should be the standard that enables the Internet of Production and what are the tools that are built on that standard. So one of the, we're a membership organization. There are a number of platforms that are members of the Alliance, and they're using different aspects of the different data standards, perhaps. But one of the things about, the driving ideas that particularly comes from a group called Manufacturing Change, led by Anna Lowe, is basically this idea that a lot of people in the world don't know the name of the particular type of pump that they're looking for or that they might need. What they know is, I need something to lift water. And so that idea of a recommender facility, it becomes fundamental to the idea of an internet of production. You know, that for me, I didn't start using the web until there were really good search engines. You know, and that's, you know, back in sort of 1996 or something, when the first search engines started being quite successful. That's when I started really getting into using the web. And I think it's going to be the same thing for the internet of production. There's going to need to be a point at which someone builds a search engine based on those recommender functions. A lot of the recommender research that's being done at the moment is based on knowledge and information, and, you know, of course, to a great degree, selling, keyword searches for particular products and so on. If you're interested in that, you're likely to be interested in that based on graph. But the and that's why Nathan's response on the number of the data set being quite small at the moment is relevant. One of the things that the world does really badly on the internet is know-how. It is, you know, we're great at sharing data and information and knowledge on the internet. We're rubbish at sharing know-how on the internet, that kind of tacit information. So I think there's, you know, I've been scratching my head thinking maybe some of the work that the Ford Foundation is doing at the moment, or some European funding or whatever, you know, could create those PhDs that you mentioned, Richard. But actually, I think I'm not sure that they're there, and we're going to have to find a way to prove that they're needed, and to make that case, because there are people who are interested in helping to build the internet of production, and we need those search engines to exist if it's going to be useful to everyday people, not just makers and manufacturers.
Yeah, agreed.
We need those search engines to point to existing manifests, which is going to be part of the big word of the next months, is getting enough to respond to a search engine.
Happily, I'm glad to say that there is some funding going into the development of a search by a group in the Netherlands. They're putting some money into the development of a search engine based on the crawlers. So back to Jerome's original question, you can put your manifest anywhere. You can use that GitHub link that Emilio put in the chat, but actually anywhere on the internet that's facing the web with that YAML file should be crawled by the search engine crawlers, and we've just secured some funding to build the next generation of that search engine that Emilio demonstrated at the beginning of the session. So there'll be more progress in this space. It's not just it's going to happen one day. It is happening at the moment. It's a little bit at a time.
I'm glad some progress is being made, Andrew. It's good to hear. I'd love to talk to the people who are working on that that crawler at some point, if that's an introduction you can make.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone's interested, the opennowhere.org website has a lot of the information. It links through to the standards repo platform, which allows for people to you know, comment on the standard and to communicate with other users of the standard and so on. That particular funding has been won by a group called KitSpace in Bristol, that's led by Casper, who open KnowHow development work you did, Nathan. Yeah, so that's good news.
Yeah, KitSpace is an excellent project. Cool, good to know. Thank you.
So all the different links and research and things that were shared on the chat have been added to the Miro board if you look for them later, because the chat is going to disappear afterwards. We have 8 minutes left. Is there another question? And it seems that we might be wrapping up a little bit, sorry, ahead of time. I want to give a really big thank you to Emilio and Nathan. Nathan jumped in at the last moment, so amazing. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I found out about this last night.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for participating. I really hope some of you can come on Saturday. I promise that it's very different. So it won't feel redundant. Shouldn't in any case. Please do reach out to us. Our emails are on the Miro board, and we also have some recruitments up and running that you might want to share to your networks. Have a great evening, day, morning, maybe. Emilio, Nathan, do you have some last words?
No, thanks so much for inviting me. Yeah. Good to see y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.